let's see here. So the first thing that we did was we created a scaffolding in Python, which was a makefile and a virtual environment. And as I mentioned before, the makefile, the reason for it is that it keeps track of commands that are annoying, that it's easy to forget all the flags. Like, for example, if I go back to the makefile real quick, if we go here, this is a lot to remember, right? Is all of these flags and options. But if I just put them inside of a step, then I don't have to remember. Likewise, this is annoying to remember to always upgrade the pip command line tool and to install the requirements, all this, and I can just say make install, right? So it's just a simplification step here. And then if we go back to the steps here, the next thing would be, typically I would write a function in a script file somewhere just so that it keeps track of it. And then next up, I would test out that script file, the function itself in IPython, which has a lot of advantages in that I can play around with the function and make sure that works. Once I've got that working, the next step would be to build a test for it. And then finally, once I've got the test, then it's ready to go. I can build a click command line tool. I mean, if you don't want to use click, you could use argparse. You can use any command line tool you want. I happen to like click, and then test all of it using the runner. Now, what I can do is add another step here, which would be, okay, how about building a computer vision tool, a CV tool? So what would be different? The steps would be pretty similar. I would say would be like this. These steps go, so create scaffolding in Python, write a function, a script file, test it out. And then for step 5 would be write a click CLI tool, right? And then step 6 here would be that I would test it with the test runner, and then I would add some other steps, is build a Lambda function, build in AWS, we'll say computer vision here, computer vision, build an AWS Lambda function, and then create trigger to S3 bucket, something like this, right? So that's in general what I would recommend. I think those kind of patterns are a great way to build code very quickly. So let's go to the next thing, which is building web apps. So how would we build some web apps really quickly? So I'm going to grab a piece of code here that will be fun to play with. That is a really simple command line tool that will allow me to build some stuff in here. So let's go back here and we'll grab this, and I'm going to go to my code space again and wake it up. I'm going to build a very small Flask app that I can use. So first up, I can use that same pattern that I did before, which is I can just source my virtual environment. So we'll say source, and then I will just say, I'll make one called change in here like this. I think I should do a get pull, right? Because I got some new changes. And if I look at this change here, first up, I can get rid of everything but my change. Actually, you know what? I think this is fine. Is I will actually rename this, and I'll say get. Let's refresh this. Source. Okay, so I'm going to move change, and I'm going to call it main, and I'll explain why in a bit. But basically, I've got this file here called main here that's got a piece of code that I want to test out, right? And what this piece of code does is it looks at an amount and then it gives me back the correct change using a greedy algorithm. And what I can do is I can say IPython, and I can say from greedy change, or from main import greedy change, like this. And notice that Flask is not here. Okay, so we can fix that. I can go here and I can install Flask. So let's go ahead and exit this and get Flask working. So I also think this demonstrates why the building things with the makefile is nice, because I can just do the make install real quick. IPython, here we go, from main import greedy change. So we know that this main file here this is our algorithm, the core algorithm. So if I go through here and I say greedy change, I should be able to say, I believe it would be a dictionary. Let's see, a float. No, it would be just an amount. So we'll just say $3.14. Here we go, like this. And notice that it says, this is the number 12, this is the remainder, and it goes back and it gives us the results. So it gives me 12 quarters, and if I put some other amount, right, I can do. So I could build a chameleon tool if I wanted to. I could build all kinds of stuff with this. In this case, what I'm going to do instead, though, is I'm going to convert this into a web application. So how do I do this? Again, the people that wrote Click and Flask are the same people, and you notice they have this pattern where instead of doing a option like -- hello, or something like this, it's just a route, like where I put app.route and then I put in the amount. So in this case, if I just say Python and I say main, it'll run a web application right here. Notice that this code space will actually let me open it up in a browser, and we can take a look at it. So here we go. We're going to the forwarded port, and look, we can see that it says hello world here. And if I want to test the other route, which is this one, I would just need to put in change dollars and cents. So let's go ahead and do this. And we'll say change 134. There we go. So we got 5 quarters, 1 nickel, 4 pennies. So let's break this down and see how this works. So what I do is I take these parameters from this web application and I put them into this function. So that's the way that Flask will allow you to create web URLs. And so I say $cents. So here we go. Here's dollar, here's cents, and I say passed in. And then here's these values, and I say these are the values that are passed in. And then I convert those into a result, which is I use f strings, and I say $.cents. I make a float out of it, and then it allows me to then pass that into that function above. And then all this does is tell us that it needs to run on port 127.0.0.1. So this thing's pretty much ready to go. It's got everything working here, and I've got a full functioning web app that does something useful. So in theory, this thing could be something that I could deploy as a web service to to a vending machine, right? Like if every time somebody put in change, it would tell me exactly what change to return back. So this is a great way, again, where this is the algorithm, right? This is the piece of logic, and I just connected this piece of logic to a web app. Now, in order to make it more useful, though, what I want to do is deploy this somewhere. So where could I actually deploy this piece of code? Well, there's a couple different places that you could run a Flask app. In particular, one of the places that's pretty handy is actually Google App Engine is one place. So let's go ahead and take a look at how that would work. So I'm going to open up Google App Engine here next. We'll say console, GCP console. And the way that Google App Engine works is that Google App Engine allows you to create these applications that are Flask apps and deploy them. So I'm going to make a new project real quick, just kind of do everything from scratch. And we'll call this change machine. Let's try that. Go ahead and create this. And once we've created this, here we go. What I can do is go ahead and click on this Activate Cloud Shell, and then start to check out this project and try to get this thing working. So here we go. We're in this Cloud Shell environment. So I need to get the source code first. So I guess first let me just check in this code. So let's go ahead and do this. Get status, get add requirements, get add main, adding Flask app. There we go. Okay, so we got this thing checked in. Now I can go back to here, grab the URL code, and then go to this Google Cloud environment. So let's go ahead and clone this. So say git clone here. And now that I've got this, I can cd into here, and I'm going to create a virtual environment again. Because again, virtual environment allows me to isolate Python to a particular project. So I'll go ahead and say virtual environment, tilde, function, bike rider. There we go. Now what's neat about this is that what I can do is also test this locally. So if I just go ahead and say Python main, it doesn't like it because I need to use Python 3. There we go. And it runs local. Now I can click on this link here, which is web preview, and it should allow me to preview this. There we go. Hello world. That looks good. And then if I want to do test the change part out, I can say change $1.34. There we go. So we know that it works locally here. And part of this is because, as I mentioned, the way that Google App Engine wants you to build things out is with, they want you to call it main. They have this weird structure. And so we're pretty close to be able to deploy this as a web service. I'm going to follow a couple steps here. So I'm going to create a new set of steps here, and we'll say building a Flask application on GCP. So building a Flask application on GCP, and we'll say it would be similar, kind of similar steps here would be create a scaffolding, test it out in a script file, test it out in IPython. We'll even say it's similar to here, but then we would say test out in Google Cloud Shell, and then deploy. So we're going to need a couple more steps here that are missing. And in particular, I'm going to need to find the steps to do my deploy. And unfortunately, I have one. I have like a GCP hello here, and I'm just going to look at the steps in order to deploy it. I believe we want to say gcloud app create. So let's kind of put these steps inside of here, step by step. So we need to do this. So we'll say 7 gcloud app create, right? So let's go ahead and run that. So let's take this command and do this. So all this does is tell App Engine to behind the scenes kind of wake things up. So go ahead and create a terminal for us, or a serverless application. We're going to say the central region, And then it'll go back and provision those resources for us. I believe it's probably running some kind of Kubernetes-based service. Okay, now to deploy it, it's pretty simple. We would just say gcloud app deploy, with some caveats here in that we need to make sure that it's got its structure set up. And so, one of the things that's missing is something called app.yaml. And notice here that it says a runtime. So I'm just going to copy this and tweak it. So we need to go here, and you can actually open an editor here if you want. So let's actually do this. We can say create app.yaml, and really that's, I believe, the only hard requirement is that app.yaml. And we'll go ahead and save this. And I guess if I'm lazy, I could just build it in here and then pull it into the Google Cloud environment. So let's do a new file here. Go to file, add a file. Add a file, create a new file, app.yaml. Like this, and then runtime, why don't we say Python 3.8, and we'll commit this. And this just tells the App Engine runtime what to do. And so I'm going to do a get pull like this. There you go. So I got this app.yaml, and now what I'll do is I'll say gcloud app deploy like that. And in theory, fingers crossed, this should deploy our service. And so it'll just basically take everything that's in that directory, and it'll throw it up into the cloud. And then in theory, we have a serverless web application here. So this usually takes probably a minute or two. It doesn't take too long typically. And while this is uploading, the other thing that we could do is actually figure out whether we wanted to set up continuous delivery or some other application service. I'm just going to let this thing finish here though for a second. Yeah, so hopefully it's pretty quick. Yeah, one thing that's interesting about the cloud services is it's always a little bit non-deterministic in terms of provisioning a platform as a service offering. So maybe actually what I'll do, just to give us, in case this takes more than a couple minutes, is I will go to here and just draw out what it is that we did, and actually the workflow here. So what we did is the following. We took a, let's go here. So building a Flask app. Building a Flask app. So how did we do this? So step one is we had a code space environment, right, which is an environment that allows us to test our code inside of GitHub itself. And we tested out at first the change application, right, which was the change logic, which is our core algorithm. And inside of there, we opened up IPython, and IPython allowed us to play around with it. Once that worked, then we knew that we can move on to, this was step one, we can move on to step two, which we got into the GCP cloud. And inside of the GCP console and also the Cloud Shell, we next opened this thing up and then ran a Flask app. We actually also ran the Flask app here. So we can say this is part A and then this was part B. We ran it, tested it out. Then we moved the Flask app here. And this Flask app, we tested it local. And then, so that would be step A. And then step B is we pushed to the Google App Engine. So this is running Google App Engine. Really, that's kind of where we're at. So I believe if we go back here, yeah, we're done. Okay. So next up, let's test this thing out. And in order to test it out, I can do this. Here we go. And there we go. Hello World is working. That's excellent. We can go here and do $1.34, which I'm missing the change part. That's why it blew up. There we go. There we go. So now we've got actually a working, publicly deployable web service. Pretty awesome. Now, what are some things that we could do later with this? Just for time, won't get into this, but you could also set up continuous delivery pretty easily by using something called code build. But in a nutshell, we've got a full working service here, and a couple other things I'll show you about App Engine. If we go to App Engine here, we can see that, in fact, with App Engine, you can even look at the log files here. And so you can go to all the different settings here. If you go to this dashboard, and you can look at, what URLs were called, look at the traces. And I think this was a bad call, right? So if I could look at this, and it will actually show me, exactly what happened and everything. So in a nutshell, there's a lot to like about this fully managed service here. But what else can we do with a function? So we've built command line tools, we've built Flask app, we've built Google App Engine app, we've built Lambdas with it. Another thing we can do is the GCP platform also has its own version of serverless functions called Cloud Functions. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. And so what we can do here is actually build out a cloud-based function. And I think from here, I'm going to shift gears and I'm going to go to something I've already created in the past, which is probably here. No, I'm going to go to, here we go. So here's a let's go ahead and take a look at this. This is a cloud function, and let's take a look at the source here. Yeah, so basically right here is an example of a cloud-based function where in order to create one of these functions, it's similar to Lambda. I can just create a hello world request here, and what it does is it gets the JSON. It expects me to put in the word amount and then the value, and then what it does is it returns back the right code. So let's go ahead and test this out to see how this would work. And if I put in amount here, we can go here and we can say amount and do 134. Let's try that out. We can also say format JSON. It's got a, or I think it has a, or I guess it automatically formatted it for us. And if I test this out, this should give us the result. There we go. Right. So we see that this thing's working. So you can do the same thing in a cloud function that we were doing with Google App Engine. So depending on what kind of a problem you're solving, this is another way to do it. So how did we do this? Well, we created an HTTP trigger. So let's go ahead and create this one ourselves from scratch so that you know how to do it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just grab this code and I'm going to build this out. So I'm going to go back to our project here, just do get pull, make sure we got the latest changes here. And then I'm going to create one called cloud function change, like this. And then let's just paste this code in here like this. And so we can just say, here's what the code looks like. That, again, it has a function that does all the work. This is really the story of the day. It accepts a JSON payload, and it does the same thing. It does that change-based operation. And I'm going to go ahead and check this in. So get status or get add. There we go. Commit this. Okay, so now that this has been pushed and everybody has access to it, let's go ahead and build this out. So let's do it step by step. So first up, how would we do this? Well, let's go to create a function, step one. And we'll call this change machine functions. Or change machine cloud function. There we go. Change machine cloud function. Perfect. And notice that, again, we're back to the trigger. The trigger is the thing that invokes it. And in this case, it'll be a web service. You could put other triggers, though, just like you can do with the AWS platform. You could trigger Google Analytics, a database as a service, cloud storage, PubSub, all kinds of stuff. We're just going to keep it simple and do HTTP. And then I'm going to say I want to allow unauthenticated invocations. There's nothing secret going on here. We'll go ahead and save this, and we'll go to next. And then we can select from many different languages. In this case, I'm going to select Python 3.8. And it has some advantages over AWS Lambda in a sense, in that you can see everything right here in front of you. Like you can see the main file and you can see the requirements file. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this main file and I'm going to just swap this out, this hello world, right? And notice that this is the entry point. So you can put whatever named function you want. So if I wanted to change this to something else, in fact, let's do that. Let's just change this to I don't know, we'll call this change. There we go. And then I'll just say entry point is now change, right? Because hello world is maybe not as helpful. And then requirements, we don't need anything in here, so I don't need to put anything inside. And I'm going to go ahead and say deploy. Great. So once this thing is deployed, we can do what we did before, which is test it out. And there's actually a couple different ways to test this thing out. And I'll show you all the different ways that we can test this thing out. So first up, we can click on this change machine here and go to the testing, just like this. And then I'll kind of get this teed up. It would just be amount and $1.34. Do that. So once this thing's ready to go, we can test it out. Okay, so we're ready to go. Let's see, does this work? We tested. We scroll down here. There we go. So it looks like this thing's working. Now, there's a bunch of other ways we can call this, and one of the ways we can call it is if we go back here to this environment, I should be able to go to the terminal. Here we go. Here's our terminal. And I'm going to just close that terminal, and I'm going to wake up this terminal. and this would map to the right project that our code is in. And what I'm going to show you is a pretty neat little trick that you can do, which is gcloud, is that you can actually call these functions with the command line. And so let's just try this here. So I'm going to go like this, and I'm going to say this particular change machine, I'm almost forgetting what I called this thing again. Let's just take a look at it real quick so I don't forget. It's a change machine cloud function. So we'll call this change machine cloud function. And I pass in the payload, and then I pass in whatever it is I want to pass in. And then this gives me back the result. So this is another really powerful way to first start with a function, start with your logic, put it into the cloud somewhere, and then do something magical with it. So I'm going to go ahead and put this into the documentation as well. So if I go back here and say, in the README, how would you build out a cloud function? So we can say, build out a GCP cloud function. You could go through here again, kind of do similar stuff, test it all out, and then you just have this other step, which is you could invoke it, right? This would be like create Google Cloud function, and then step 7 would be that you would invoke via the CLI. And then this is just the actual code command. And then the output that it gives you back is, here we go. Here's our output. Something like this, right? And we could do bash like that. Now, there's other ways though we can test this out. So I'm going to push this change, git add, readme, adding steps. The other way we can actually test this thing out here would be that if we look at, I think I have something called serverless cookbook, where I have an example of GCP cloud function change. Thought it was here. Yeah, so here we go. Let's look at this one. So notice that we did something like this, but you also could invoke it like this. You could also invoke it via a curl command as well. So if I wanted to go back here and not use the command line tool, just literally invoke this from anywhere, I could also do something like this, where I just run a curl command because it's a web-based service, and I can just put in the name of that function. So if I go like this and I grab this here, we can actually go through here and actually invoke this function like this. And then this one, I believe, let's just see here. I don't think we need that part. Let me just double check here. Yeah, I think we just need this. Oh, I actually, no, what I need to do is this. I need to go to trigger, and I need to copy this URL. So I need to copy this URL. So basically, you need to find the URL that you're going to call. There we go. So that's our full URL. There we go. And then we've got the result. And if I wanted to change this to some other amount, for example, $10, there we go. We're able to call this web service. So I'll go ahead and paste, something like this in there as well. which we had copied from this example, right? It would be to invoke via curl. You can also do that. So we can go to our README file and say, it's like another way to invoke is via a curl command. So a lot of fun stuff that you can do with these functions. Once you start thinking in functions, it really, the sky's the limit. And this is the golden era now, in my opinion, of building things with functions, because there's so many things that map really well to building in functions, and there's so many hooks. Adding examples here. So I guess what we could do is maybe ping pong a little bit back. So we showed all the cool stuff you can do on Google Cloud, but let's maybe wrap this up with going back again to the AWS environment. So I'm going to go to that environment real quick, and let's also show how you can do similar invocations there. So I'm going to go to Cloud9 again, and I'm going to show you something that we can do that's pretty fun, which is I mentioned this earlier, that I had this kind of serverless cookbook here, and what I can do is look at this. So you can also do similar things from the AWS terminal. And so if I go through here and I open up this IDE, for example, you also don't necessarily need to invoke everything via the console via Lambda, right? I mean, there's a lot to like about it, but let me just show you a couple other tricks about using these consoles. So the one that I just built was this Marco, right? If I want to play around with this thing and invoke it, I can always go through here and test it out by just saying test, right? And doing, Marco, and then putting in the name Marco, right? But even more, it would be nice to be able to invoke that from other spots, right? So we see that, there we go. It played around with what we did, and we were able to test it. But even further, what if I could invoke it from a terminal? Well, you can. So if I go here and I do this, and I'm going to say, in this case, it was called Marco 128. Marco 128. I also can invoke this by putting this payload in, just like this, and then I just tell it this command. So I'm going to put this command in as well into our README file and say invoke AWS Lambda. It's kind of the same thing. Do something like this, right? You could do something kind of similar. Whoops. Text. Right, and we'll save that. So if I go back again to this environment, to me this is pretty awesome, is that the fact that I can just test out things via this command line tool and invoke things, and I could build these really complex systems together and test them out. There we go. No, right? So we see that I'm able to invoke it via the AWS command line tools. Even further though, a couple other things that we can do that's kind of neat is that if I go to AWS resources here, notice that I can find that function, which is Marco 128. And if I right click on it, I can say imports, and it will actually import it into my environment here. And once I go into this Cloud9 environment, I've actually got a full IDE that allows me to debug this thing. and co-develop, more things. So if I go here and I right click, I can say run, and I can either invoke it locally, or I can even invoke it remotely. So let's look at the remote invocation. So if I go through here and I put in the word name is Sally, run it. Let's go ahead and run this thing out. Right there, right? You can see it says no, right? I'm invoking Sally, maybe Jesse. There we go. Raphael. Okay, we got this thing cooking. And then if I go back to AWS here and I look at monitor and I look at these logs here, view logs and CloudWatch, we should be able to see all those invocations that I did. And if we go through here, we see all those different invocations. Now, one thing that's going on though, that we'll fix right now, is that notice that this function doesn't do any print statements. So let's go here. Notice that that's how logs appear in Lambda. So if I wanted to see this, what I would do is this. I would go print and say, I am inside of Lambda, and this is my event. And I would put in that event there. And then I could even put in another print statement here that says prints sending polo, right? And then I could do another print that says, didn't find polo, found no, or whatever it is, whatever logging I want to put in. And now what I can do is that I can first test it out local. So I can go here, run local, test this out. Takes me a second to kind of wake this thing up. There we go. There we go. So I think this one's Python 3.8. So there was an issue because this environment's only expects Python 3.6. Not a big deal though. Let me just deploy this thing, and we'll just say deploy. And what'll happen is it should be a really quick deploy. Is if I go back to code, you'll see that the code should be. There we go. Look, all those are deployed. And then now I can actually invoke it remote. So I'm going to go ahead and say run remote. And there we go. We run again. I'm inside. And we'll say Sally here as well. Run this. Perfect. And then if I go back to the CloudWatch logs here, they should appear. There we go. We can see all my messages.